I'm Margaret Brennan in Washington, and this week on Face the Nation, as Vice President Harris and former President Trump prepare to face off for the first time in Philadelphia, an exclusive conversation with Trump's top primary rival, former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley. You have endorsed Donald Trump. You spoke at the convention. But are you going to campaign for him?
You know, he knows I'm on standby.
With just under 2 months until Election Day, Nikki Haley shares her advice on what the Republican nominees should be focused on to win. Harris ally, North Carolina's Democratic Governor Roy Cooper, will also join us. His state has gone red the last 3 presidential elections. What would it take for his party to win it this November? Plus, the U.S. uncovers a sprawling effort by Russia to interfere with the 2024 elections. We'll talk with the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, Connecticut's Jim Himes. And the chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Michael McCaul, will be here. He's revealing the results of his 3-year investigation into the Biden administration's withdrawal from Afghanistan. It's all just ahead on Face the Nation. Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. We're starting a consequential week for both the Trump and Harris campaigns. With just 58 days until Election Day, both are preparing for their first debate. Will it change a race that remains neck and neck? We begin this morning with our new CBS Battleground Tracker poll of the 3 key states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, where the race is essentially even. Vice President Kamala Harris is up just 1 point in Michigan, tied with former President Trump in Pennsylvania, and up 2 points in Wisconsin. Senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang is in one of those states, Pennsylvania, and has the latest from the trail.
In Pittsburgh.
Can I have a hug? Yes, come here. Of course.
Vice President Harris took a break from intense debate preps to shop with voters.
Are you ready to face Donald Trump? Yes, I am.
Harris was asked what she wants to get across during the debate.
It's time to turn the page on the divisiveness. It's time to bring our country together, chart a new way forward.
Rallying in Wisconsin, Trump had a different message.
We're run by stupid people. Stupid people. And we found that out at the debate with Joe. How did that work out? And we're going to find it out again on Tuesday night. Is anybody going to be watching?
Harris's aides say she plans to focus on policy, not personality. Our new poll shows Harris is competitive, in part because voters think she'll help the middle class, and she has an edge on making housing more affordable. But Trump is doing better with those who say the economy and inflation are major issues, especially holding favor among non-college and white voters. Sources familiar with Trump's debate prep say it's been informal, but he is going over specific policy proposals. A senior Harris campaign official says they believe Trump thrives under bright lights and on national TV, and they expect he will be ready. Margaret?
That's Weijia Jiang in Pittsburgh. We caught up with former Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley on Friday. The former ambassador and South Carolina governor explained why she is supporting Trump. But you'll also hear her views on what she thinks he should be focused on in these last 2 months until Election Day. We began by asking if she'll campaign with him. You said you're on standby. In other words, you haven't been asked to campaign. Are you advising at all on his debate preparation or speaking to the campaign?
I'm not. And, you know, that's his choice. He can, you know, whatever he decides to do with his campaign, he can do that. But when I called him back in June, I told him I was supportive. I think the teams have talked to each other a little bit, but there hasn't been an ask as of yet. But, you know, should he ask, I'm happy to be helpful.
Donald Trump just finished a press conference, 3/4 of which was about grievances related to that past conviction related to alleged sexual assault. I know when you were campaigning, you said you had no reason really to question the findings of the jury related to the defamation case brought by E. Jean Carroll. I'm not asking about the specifics of the case, but if that's the focus of a press conference for a presidential candidate, A, is it the best use of his time? And what is the message to female voters to be going through this again?
Well, I think the focus for me is on policy. You know, I think
But he's the candidate.
No, and I've always said, look, if I thought Biden or Trump were great candidates, I wouldn't have run for president. I ran because I thought I could do a better job.
You don't think he's a good candidate?
I think he is the Republican nominee, and I think put him against Kamala Harris, who's the Democrat nominee, for me, it's not a question. Now, do I agree with his style? Do I agree with his approach? Do I agree with his communications? No. When I look at the policies and how they affect my family and how I think they're going to affect the country, that's where I go back and I look at the differences. I mean, these are the candidates we have been given. You know, you look at Kamala Harris and it's quite remarkable. She never had a debate. She never had a primary. She never had anyone vote for her. And they basically took her and in 48 hours, they put her back out there and she was this whole new candidate. But the reality is she has a record. Mm-hmm. The administration has a record. Trump has a record. And so neither are perfect. Neither are ideal.
So let's talk about the policies then. One of the things that we know is hurting American families is the high cost of child care. The Federal Reserve said parents typically spend 50 to 70% as much per month on child care as they do on their housing payment, which is usually the largest monthly expense. Yet yesterday, Donald Trump said,
as much as child care is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive.
That sounds out of touch with the economic statistics.
I mean, child care is very expensive. I know just even at the time that I had little kids, I worked just to pay for our child care.
So what part of his policy do you like on that? Because you said on your policies that's what made you back in.
It is. And what I liked were the tax cuts that he had, that Kamala wants to remove. You know, when
she wants to also expand the child tax credit.
But that's the problem. When you get into child tax credits, you're picking winners and losers. You know what I would rather? I'd rather them just cut middle class taxes across the board. Families need more money for housing, for childcare, for gas, for everything just to live their life. I'm looking at the facts. Under Harris, they raised taxes. Under Trump, they cut taxes.
So you don't like child care tax credits that Trump's proposing either?
I think we have to do something to help child care. What I would rather say is, rather than you saying we're going to give child care tax credits, help everybody. Cut middle class taxes. That's really what people need. Let them have more money, whether it's housing, whether it's rent, whether it's groceries, whether it's gas, whether it's child care. They need some relief. And so I don't oppose a child care tax credit, but I think cutting middle class taxes across the board is better.
So we know that since Vice President Harris entered the race, the gap among women voters has grown to a now double-digit lead for her over Donald Trump, according to our CBS most recent survey. So how do they close that? Because just as recently as last week, J.D. Vance said he's disoriented and disturbed that the head of the most powerful teachers union in the country doesn't have a single child. He continues to say things that certainly are highlighted as being offensive to women. That is going to hurt, won't it, with female voters?
It's not helpful. It's not helpful. I mean,
is he an effective messenger for the policies you say they are stronger on?
I think that the policies, look, you can either look at style or you can look at substance. I choose as a voter to look at substance. The style, I will say.
What's the substance of that, though?
The substance is cutting taxes, making housing more affordable, immigration, national security. That's the substance. The style is, no, it is not helpful to talk about whether women have children or whether they don't. It's not helpful to say any of those things that are personality driven or anything else. I have said that, and I will continue to say to Republicans, stop it. That's not helpful. You know, if you want to talk about things, stick with policy. Americans are smart. They don't need all of this other noise to distract them. They just want to know how you're going to help them. And they're, you know, what I would suggest to every American, look at the records of each of them. You've got some stark contrast there. You know, Harris was not strong on the border. Trump was strong on the border. Harris wanted to eliminate fracking. Now she's taking that back. But energy production was not as strong as it was under the Trump administration.
It's at a record high right now, actually. But when you listen to some of the things, you said you don't like handouts. And you're concerned about sort of the fiscal conservatism here. Former President Trump pledged to mandate that the government and insurance companies pay for fertilization treatments or IVF treatments for women. Is that a policy you would support, that insurance companies or the federal government pay for that?
It's not a policy I support any more than it's a policy of Kamala Harris to remove private health insurance or Medicare for all. Look, at the end of the day,
but this is the head of the Republican Party. This is the Republican nominee.
I know, but Margaret, you also have to talk about the head of the Democrat Party. You know, don't just look at one and not look at the other. When you talk about Medicare for all, when you talk about removing private health insurance, you might as well be Canada. You might as well look at socialist health care. We never want to get to that point, because you're not going to get IVF or anything else, cancer drugs or anything else when it comes to that. When you look at health care, we need to know, both of my children were products of fertility. We want that option to be available to everyone. But the way you do it is you don't mandate coverage. Instead, you go and you make sure that coverage is accessible, and you make sure that you're doing everything you can to make it affordable.
You would still urge people who identify as Republican to support policies that you say are not conservative.
I don't agree with Trump 100% of the time. I don't have to like him or agree with him 100% of the time to know that life for Americans would be better under the policies where we have strong immigration, where we have law and order, where we have an economy where we can look at opportunities, where we've got national security that is strong. I don't need to sit there and like someone to decide those policies are better.
But it's grading on a curve.
It's not grading on a curve. I think it's how you look at it, because I would ask you, how are people going to be better going through the next 4 years like we have the last 4 years? Any American will tell you their life is not better. So our goal is, how do we make life better? Instead of making it about the personalities, can we not start saying, what do we all agree about on the policies? Because there's some serious policy concerns.
Let me ask you about China, because this is a very serious threat picture around the world right now. You were just in Taiwan for the first time. Former President Trump said Taiwan should pay us for defense, and the U.S. is no different than an insurance company. How concerned were Taiwanese officials by that comment?
First of all, when I went to Taiwan, I think it's important that Americans know what I saw. I met with the president, the vice president, the defense minister. We were on a military base. We met with their intelligence officers. The life of a Taiwanese every single day. First of all, they have 30 million cyber attacks a month in Taiwan. They have aggression from air and sea by the Chinese every single week. I wanted to see if Taiwan, if they were victims waiting for a handout, or what they were saying. And I was so impressed, because they're not waiting for help from anyone. 10 years ago, their Chinese investment was 84%. Today, their Chinese investment is 11%. They are proactively not investing in China. Their mandatory military service, starting at 18 years old, they had started at 4 months. They've now increased it. You have to serve militarily at 18 for a year. They've, while cutting that investment, they are getting ready militarily. They're doing joint training with America, which is fantastic. When it comes to our allies, when it comes to freedom-loving countries, we need to be the best friend to them that we can. Because if China takes Taiwan, what we saw with Russia and Ukraine, it affected 1% of GDP, and you saw the economy shake from that. If China takes Taiwan, it would be 10% of the global GDP. That's $10 trillion compared to the $1 trillion in Ukraine. We need to care about that. We need to care about it from freedom. We need to care about it from the economy. We need to care about it from security. And we need to care about the fact that if Russia takes Ukraine and China takes Taiwan, we can't assume we're going to be okay if we live in a silo, because that's not the case.
But what you just laid out is a policy that's strongly in defense of Taiwan.
It is.
Are you saying that the next president should commit, because neither J.D. Vance nor Donald Trump have said that they would send U.S. troops to defend Taiwan?
I don't think we need to send U.S. troops to defend Taiwan.
Joe Biden said he would.
Taiwan
told my colleague at 60 Minutes.
Taiwan does not want troops. What Taiwan is asking for is joint military training and to partner with us so that they can make weapons to defend themselves. And they want intelligence sharing. Look, I'm the wife of a combat veteran. The last thing we want to do is just keep thinking about sending troops. If anything, we want to prevent war. The best way to prevent war from China is to start arming Taiwan now and making sure that they're ready.
When you were campaigning, you said when President Trump left office, China was militarily stronger than before. I mean, they've only increased that in terms of their nuclear development and their expansion of their military. You said Trump did not put us on a stronger military foothold in Asia. He did not stop all the theft of American technology. He had moral weakness in trying to befriend President Xi. If this is the threat of this century, how can you say he is the commander-in-chief you can support now?
Because I look at what happened under the Harris administration. You look at this situation.
But aren't we supposed to judge that record?
No, we're going to judge both records. So let's first look at the Harris administration. Russia never would have invaded Ukraine. China would not be circling.
They did not withdraw from Ukraine.
No, well, go further. They wouldn't have started war with Ukraine, and China would not have gotten more aggressive with Taiwan if we would have not had that fall in Afghanistan. It's not that we left Afghanistan, it's how we left it. It was dangerous, it was careless, and it was weak, and we have suffered ever since. We didn't have any conflicts under Trump. I was his UN ambassador. We put more sanctions on Russia. We kept China at bay. We let our allies know that they were protected. All of that happened. Now, what I will say to both Trump and Harris is the worst thing we can do is walk back from our friends right now. And so we need to be a friend to Ukraine, not make them beg. We need to be a friend to Taiwan, prepare so that China doesn't do it. We need to be a friend to Israel and not say we're going to give you and then take it back like what Harris and Biden did. We've got to start being friends with our allies. I will say it until I'm blue in the face. America can never be so arrogant to think we don't need friends. And you have to be a friend to get a friend. So look, there are no perfect administrations here by any means, but Trump was definitely stronger when it came to national security as opposed to the Harris administration. And that's just a fact.
But how can you be confident that he will be? You're talking about 4 more years. When he is saying things like this, he's talking about like a protection racket for Taiwan. They have to pay us.
No, and I'll be the first one to say that's not the way it should be. Look, I'm always going to tell you the truth on where I think. This is not blind support for anyone. This is saying don't sit there and threaten Taiwan that you're going to, on being friends. This is, they have 50% of our chip production. They are a friend and ally to us, and they're a democracy. Let's have the, if anything, this is what I would tell Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. What you need to do with Taiwan is help them economically, militarily, diplomatically. Economically, we should have a free trade agreement with Taiwan, without question. Diplomatically, we should require that Taiwan become a member in the United Nations and in the World Health Organization. And militarily, we should do whatever we can to joint exercise, share intelligence, and do what we can.
You have talked about the isolationism in the party, and it troubles you. This past week, Justice Department brought a case against Russia regarding a $10 million disinformation campaign in which it was using, in part, right-wing media. Do you think that this isolationist streak is being fueled by the Russian state? The problems you are diagnosing right now, that you are also saying Donald Trump is echoing in some way.
Margaret, this is bigger than that. This is the tip of the iceberg. First of all, look at what happened in Hochul's office with the Chinese influence and what was happening there.
The governor here in New York.
Look at the murder for hire plot on U.S. soil, which I was named in by Iran. Look at the Russian disinformation, which didn't start this year. This has been going on for years. Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea to some extent. They have spent years on the cheapest form of warfare, which is how do you divide Americans and cause chaos. They have done that. When I was running my presidential campaign, the FBI had a separate hearing with me to let me know that Iran was meddling in our, influencing the election with our campaign. They were
to hurt you or to help you?
To hurt me.
To hurt you.
You know, the murder for hire plot named me. That's by Iran. This has been going for a long time. And Americans need to wake up. Don't just look at Russia. Don't just look at China. Don't just look at Iran. The biggest lesson we need to take is when you look at social media, I bet you a larger percentage of those are foreign engagements. And when I was in Taiwan, they would tell you they could look at Facebook Anytime Taiwan put something out, it was suppressed. Anything China put out, it was played up. Why is that? Our social media companies owe Americans from a national security perspective. How many of these foreign bots are dividing us? Every bit of our government, influencers, press, and media need to say how many of these foreign influencers are buying people, and what are we doing to protect us? Nothing. No one's talking about TikTok. Biden and Trump both said they were against TikTok. They're both on it now. Kamala's on it now. China loves that. America needs to wake up when it comes to foreign actors.
Face the Nation will be back in 1 minute. Stay with us. And we go now to the Governor Roy Cooper of North Carolina, a battleground state. He joins us from Raleigh. Good morning to you, Governor.
Good morning, Margaret. Good morning.
Vice President Harris will be in your state Thursday. We know this is a consequential week. Debates can be catastrophic. They can be inconsequential. Do you anticipate the average North Carolinian is open to persuasion or even watching what happens on that debate stage this week?
There's no question about it. It's close here in North Carolina. It always is. This was Biden-Harris's closest loss in 2020, only 1.3%. So the fact that Kamala Harris, as Vice President of the United States, has been to North Carolina 17 times shows that she cares about our state. She knows that we are in play, and she knows that if she wins North Carolina, she is the next president of the United States because Trump has no other pathway.
Is it winning, or is it just reducing the amount by which they lose rural voters? You have a very large rural population in your state.
And, you know, things that the Biden-Harris administration has done has helped our rural population. I've been able to expand Medicaid here in North Carolina. That's helped working rural North Carolinians. We're getting high-speed internet all across our state. That's something that people are beginning to find out about. And she's got a plan. She's got a plan to lower costs for North Carolinians, particularly in this child care arena, drug pricing. We're excited about the economic plan that she has, and I think North Carolinians will respond to it.
Well, I want to ask you more about some of that because our latest CBS polling shows it is a very, very tight race, and it is the issue of economy and inflation that is weighing the most on voters. So we're going to talk about that in a few minutes when we take this break, and we'll come back to finish it with you, Governor. Stay with us. CBS will have special coverage of the presidential debate on Tuesday with a preview at 8 p.m. Eastern. The live simulcast of the debate will begin at 9 p.m., followed by expert analysis.
This portion of Face the Nation is brought to you by Simply Safe. There's no safe like Simply Safe.
Welcome back to Face the Nation. We continue our conversation with the Democratic governor of North Carolina, Roy Cooper. Governor, our CBS polling shows this is still a competitive race for Donald Trump, largely because of those voters who just don't think they are better off financially right now. Their incomes are not keeping up with inflation. This is especially true among non-college and white and working class voters. How did Democrats change this perception?
Well, I think that same poll, Margaret, said that people had more trust in Kamala Harris to help the middle class. And as she spends time getting out her economic plan of shifting the tax burden here, we need to make sure that billionaires and corporations pay their fair share and that everyday people and small businesses get the tax benefits. As she talks about her child care plan and providing child care tax credits, you've got Donald Trump, who clearly doesn't understand the problem. You got J.D. Vance, who's saying, well, you should get your grandparents or your aunts or uncles to look after children. Completely clueless. When we continue to get this information out to the American public and to people here in North Carolina, that Kamala Harris has an economic plan that's going to help lower the cost for everyday people, that's going to help families thrive, that is going to protect women's reproductive freedom. I think at the end of the day, That's going to be what works here.
Well, you got a short period of time to do that, sir, in this election. One of the things that we did hear about from the vice president this past week was her endorsement of a less dramatic increase in the capital gains tax rate than what Joe Biden had proposed. This is a tax on assets owned for more than a year on households bringing in over $1 million in income. Now, the vice president hasn't said whether she supports Biden's proposal to tax unrealized gains. That's getting a lot of focus from Republicans. I'm just wondering, though, is this announcement and positioning really just an attempt to appear more moderate, to appear more pro-business? Is it just a political ploy?
I think what Kamala Harris found out in the period of time, the 3.5+ years that she's been vice president, that you have to achieve consensus to get things done. And that's exactly what she's been able to do. Overall, what she wants to do is to shift the burden here. Clearly, the billionaires are not paying their fair share. And we've got to figure out a way to make sure that we can get them to do that while easing the burden on the middle class. And the way you do that is to try to find consensus, because as you know, it's very tough to get legislation through both the House and the Senate. And that will continue to be a challenge, but she's shown that she's got the ability to help do that. Tim Walz was in the Congress, so he's got the ability to help push legislation that helps shift this balance. So I'm excited about the potential for them being president and vice president of the United States.
Well, and having to work with Congress. I want to ask you about guns. We saw this horrific shooting in Georgia this past week, and the father of that shooter is facing second-degree murder and other charges because he gave his son that AR-15 style weapon that was used. You're a former state attorney general, and I wonder what you think of this precedent of prosecuting parents. Do you think it's effective in dissuading gun violence?
I think we have to do everything we can to reduce gun violence, particularly gun violence in our schools. And I think that that is appropriate. But we also know that these military-style assault weapons are being used by lots of people. They can kill multiple people. We don't need to have them on the streets. Look, you can't be tough on crime if you're weak on gun laws. Vice President Harris and I here in North Carolina, as a gun owner, as the supporter of the Second Amendment, support stronger background checks, red flag laws, and banning these military-style assault weapons. We shouldn't even have them available for people to use in these mass murders that are occurring. I'm tired of seeing texts from children in a school telling their parents that they're afraid and that they love them. We cannot normalize this. J.D. Vance says this is just a fact of life. No, it's not.
He said
it should not.
He said he regrets that it's become a fact of life. But you do agree then with prosecuting parents, is what I understand from what you just said there.
Look, if the evidence is there, yes.
Okay.
That we need to make sure that people are responsible. If you're giving a 14-year-old, and I don't know what all of the evidence is here. Obviously, you got to wait until the court. But if you're giving a 14-year-old, particularly one who's said that they are involved or like mass shootings, and you're giving that 14-year-old an AR-15 as a birthday present, that is a problem.
Would you serve perhaps as Attorney General in a future Harris administration?
Look, I'm gonna be involved in some kind of public service. I'm running through the tape as governor. It's a lot for me to do. Going to work to make sure that we elect Kamala Harris as president, elect Democrats in North Carolina. Then we'll see.
All right, Governor, thank you for your time. We'll be right back. We're back with the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Republican Michael McCaul of Texas. Congressman, good morning.
Thanks for having me.
I have a lot to get to with you. I want to quickly ask you about what we heard from the Justice Department on Friday in regard to this massive Russian scheme to influence the upcoming election. Back in the spring, you took some heat after you said Russian propaganda had infected a good chunk of your party's base, and you blamed right-wing media. It seems like you're being vindicated here, but Donald Trump said yesterday at a rally, he seemed to dismiss all of it. I don't know what it is with poor Russia. Do you have any reason to doubt what the Justice Department and intelligence community said?
Well, look, Russia's been trying to do this, many years. So has China. So has Iran, for that matter. And it's intensified. And I think I didn't blame anybody for it. I blame Russia for putting disinformation in the United States that does get picked up by people unwittingly in many cases. I think in this particular case, the owners of the company knew they were dealing with a Russian disinformation campaign. And if that's true, should be indicted. But it's a problem with China. They're involved in my election, just like Nikki talked about her election. Iran, under indictment there. Yeah. So, I mean, this is Russia, China, Iran, North Korea.
I want to put that aside for a minute and delve into your investigation. You've been on this program a number of times over the past 3 years investigating the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. Your report comes out tomorrow. Explain the timing, because it's in election season, a day before the presidential debate. Your ranking member colleague is saying that this is politically motivated and they didn't even get a copy of the report. Why is that?
They're getting a copy of the report today, as is Secretary Blinken, as is the White House.
Is this politics, though, in an election year?
No, it's taken me 2 years to get to this point because of the obstruction. I've had to serve subpoena after subpoena, move to compel, threaten to, hold the secretary in contempt to get information like after action reports, all these documents, testimonies that we finally got to. Why is it important right now, Margaret? Because of the foreign policies at stake. What happened after Afghanistan impacted the world. Why? Because Putin responded by invading Ukraine 2 months after Afghanistan fell. Chairman Xi, Putin made an unholy alliance in Beijing, threatening the Pacific now. And then the Ayatollah reared his ugly head in the Middle East. And we're seeing this finally, and this is really important. The Bagram prisons unleashed thousands of ISIS-K prisoners that went to the Khorasan region. 8 of those, and that's who we know about, have been detained by the FBI in the United States that got in through the southwest border. This is a failed foreign policy colliding with a failed border policy all at the same time. I think it's very relevant. Lastly, my investigation will go well after the election.
Where does it go next?
We have a lot of unanswered questions regarding the DOD. What happened on the ground? Why were these snipers left basically unprotected? Where was the surveillance equipment that was videotaping? Why don't we have one video of the suicide bomber going off?
Well, there's a GoPro camera that you document that did film it, and there was a Reaper drone, I believe, that started filming 3 minutes after the explosion. But are you implying here some kind of conspiracy? I mean, you can't be saying that the Pentagon wanted...
I'm not a conspiracy guy. I'm a prosecutor. This was done very methodically. I wasn't looking for press clippings. I did this facts, evidence. I didn't reach any conclusions. But the fact is, typically, they do multi-attacks at the same time. We know that...
The ISIS suicide bombers who attacked at Abbey Gate.
That's their modus operandi. That's how they conduct these things. We do know that all the video was destroyed after. What we know from the Marines on the ground is that shots were coming from the Taliban. And some of the Marines were actually hit by bullets, according to their testimony. It's the best evidence we have because the videos were destroyed.
Well, General McKenzie, in a briefing in 2022, said that that was ball bearings that came from the suicide bomber's explosion, and there was some dispute over the bullets.
And that very well may be the case.
But I guess why I'm asking is there have been multiple CENTCOM investigations, a State Department investigation. Do you not accept the findings of those investigations?
If it wasn't for my investigation, CENTCOM never would have reopened an investigation. It was this, very brave sniper that came forward, Tyler Vargas Andrews. They came forward and said, I had the suicide bomber in my sights. I asked for permission to engage. Permission was denied.
CENTCOM denies that happened.
They denied it happened. I want to know where they got the picture. Is that a picture of the bomber at the site at HKIA? Or where do they get that picture? We just don't know.
HKIA being the airport. I want to ask you, though, 11 Marines One sailor and one soldier lost their lives at Abbey Gate when that suicide bomber detonated. On Tuesday, the Speaker of the House is presenting an award to the family members of the fallen. That's also debate day. I think you would agree, all Gold Star families need to be respected in this country. More than 2,400 Americans were killed in Afghanistan, 45 combat deaths under Donald Trump. Why aren't all of them being honored? Why only these 13?
Well, this was one of the deadliest days in Afghanistan. It could have been prevented if the State Department did its job by law and executed the plan of evacuation. They did not do that until the day the Taliban invaded and overran Kabul. By that time, it was too late. They left these 13 servicemen and women hanging out to dry, 170 Afghans killed, 45 service members and Afghans injured as a result of the, I'd say, moral negligence on the part of the administration allowing this to happen. I think it's totally appropriate to honor them. It was never done with the intention of it being on the same date as the debate. That was not a coordinated effort.
Really?
To my knowledge, it was not.
General McKenzie, who was the CENTCOM commander in 2021, said the Trump-era Doha agreement was one of the worst negotiating mistakes ever made by the United States. It was the operational mechanism that killed Afghanistan, that destroyed the government of Afghanistan. Did you identify mistakes by the Trump administration?
Well, we identified Zal Khalilzad. The mistake here with
the negotiator.
With Doha was the fact that he negotiates with the Taliban and leaves out the Afghan government.
Right.
That was a slap in the face to them, and it was not good for morale. Having said that, the Taliban...
That was the Trump policy.
Yeah, and the Taliban was in violation of Doha. That's why Trump left 2,500 troops. When President Biden came into office, it was very clear, go to zero. In fact, his press guy said, it's immaterial. Doha agreement's immaterial to us going to zero.
Yeah.
We're getting the hell out of there, irrespective of conditions on the ground.
Both presidents agreed with getting out. It was the military that opposed.
Well, the Trump administration had conditions. I don't think we can speculate. One thing's for sure, Biden had an agenda on day one to get out.
I have so many more questions for you, sir, but I'm told we're out of time and we have to leave it there. Mike McCaul, chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. We'll be back in a moment.
Thanks, Mark.
Joining us now is the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, Democrat Jim Himes of Connecticut. Congressman, good morning to you.
Thanks for having me, Margaret.
A lot I want to get to with you, but I did want to offer you a chance to respond, if you care to Congressman McCaul. I know you and most Democrats supported President Biden's decision to withdraw from Afghanistan, although I think you'd agree the exit was one of the darkest days of his presidency to date. What do you make of the Republican argument that this reflects on Vice President Harris's abilities to serve as commander-in-chief?
Well, you're right, Margaret, when you say that that was a very dark day. Anytime we lose service members, it's a very dark day. And the 13 that we lost at Abbey Gate are rightly remembered. And you know how you remember them best? You remember, as you pointed out in your interview with Chairman McCaul, that there were also almost 2,500 others killed in Afghanistan over a 20-year period. What Chairman McCaul is going to offer to the American people, though, is, and you said it right, it's going to be about Vice President Harris. It is a politicized, cherry-picked report designed to do one thing, not shed light on a tragedy, which, by the way, I would support 100%. And by the way, let's also look at the 20 years and the 4 presidents that doubled down on Afghanistan policy. It is going to be a nakedly partisan campaign thing. Chairman McCaul said it at the end there. You know, what the military issues that he was raising, you know, he didn't mention the fact that when he said that President Biden came with an agenda to withdraw from Afghanistan, President Biden did not come with an agenda. He came with a binding agreement negotiated by President Trump, who also released 5,000 Taliban. And by the way, and here's the key point that didn't come up, who also left President Biden with 2,500 troops in Afghanistan.
Yes.
Margaret, when we were attacked on January 6th on the Capitol, in the days after, we had more than 2,500 National Guardsmen guarding the Capitol. That's the tools, and that's the agreement that Donald Trump left President Biden with.
And there were thousands more NATO troops as well. So the 2,500 is a little bit misleading, but let's put that aside. Just to honor our allies there, that surely you know about. I want to ask you about the ISIS threat. On Friday, it was disclosed that a 20-year-old ISIS supporter was apprehended 12 miles from the U.S.-Canada border. The FBI said the individual was a Pakistani citizen residing in Canada who was planning a mass shooting attack in New York City on or around October 7th to kill as many Jews as possible. Do you have any insight into whether this individual was self-radicalized? Was he directed? What is the threat picture here?
Yeah, you know, we've been out of session for some time, so it's been a little while since I've had a classified briefing, so I probably can't specifically answer the question about that individual. What I can tell you is two things. Number one, ISIS is dedicated, as is, by the way, Iran and any number of other groups, to trying to strike the United States. That is a fact, and that is why it is so important, the work of the intelligence community and the FBI to stop that stuff. And they're pretty good at that. You saw the arrests, of course, of the 8 people who were affiliated with terrorist groups. They're very good at what they do. It's very hard for them to be perfect, but it's also important that we not over-exaggerate the threat here. We have come a very long way. I'm actually just back from a 9/11 ceremony on the 23rd anniversary, celebrating or memorializing that hideous attack. The intelligence community, the military, the FBI have come a long way since 9/11, and as a consequence, we learn about these things, and hopefully we'll be in a position to obstruct as many of them as possible.
Fair point. I want to switch gears if I can, you are right to remind us all that we are coming up on that 9/11 anniversary, a memorial to all of those. On the question of election interference, we got these disclosures from the intelligence community this week and the Justice Department. This was a sophisticated scheme to interfere in the election by setting up fake news sites, paying $10 million to a Tennessee-based company to launder Moscow's propaganda. They used podcasters, they used well-known personalities on YouTube to trick American voters in swing states, according to the DOJ. How effective has this campaign been?
Well, that's a really hard question to answer, Margaret, because that gets into the question of, gosh, are these crazy right-wing websites and right-wing journalists who evidently their money came from Russia, are they actually having an impact on the election? It's sort of hard to believe in a 50-50 election that's going to be played out in sort of 4 or 5 states that it's not going to have some impact on the margin, which is why 2 things are really important. Number one, back to the FBI, back to our intelligence community, they need to double down on identifying, naming and shaming those countries that are doing this, and Chairman McCaul was right. It's primarily Russia. Russia has really pulled out all the stops, but it's also China, it's also Iran. There's even some other countries that are thinking about it. But Margaret, I feel very passionately about this. They can only succeed if American citizens hand over their autonomy, their sovereignty, their critical thinking abilities to the Russians or to the Chinese. And so what I always tell my constituents, if you're looking at some random social media site and you are getting hotter and hotter and angrier, and people who disagree with you are not just the opposition, but they're traitors, you know what you're doing? You are being manipulated. And it may just be by Facebook's algorithms, but there's some chance it might actually be the Kremlin or the Chinese or the Iranians who are manipulating you. And if you're going to be manipulated that easily, guess what? This country is going to get the democracy that we deserve.
Vladimir Putin publicly said he was endorsing Vice President Harris this past week. U.S. intelligence, though, assesses that it is Donald Trump that is, in fact, Moscow's preferred candidate. Do you know whether Putin is directing this particular campaign?
Well, I will tell you that super sensitive things like meddling in U.S. elections, you know the nature of the Kremlin and of Putin and of his autocracy. Nothing serious happens in Russia without Vladimir Putin signing off on it. So precisely how involved he is an open question. But believe me, yes, he would. And look, the whole, I'm endorsing Harris thing. Yeah. All you need to do is listen to the way the 2 candidates talk about Russia and Ukraine, and you can develop a pretty independent sense of what Putin would like to see happen on Election Day.
You said earlier this week that banks are required to research their clients. When you were being asked about this case of a Tennessee-based company that CBS is reporting is Tenet Media that was being manipulated by the Russians. What is the principle you're asking to be applied here?
Well, I guess, and I'm not talking about legal compulsion necessarily here, although banks are required to know their customers. It's nice to imagine that, massive social media platforms or massive media platforms like Tenet might actually do a little research to try to figure out where their money is coming from.
Yeah.
Frankly, the people who look at their media have a right to know where that money comes from. So, at a minimum, check this stuff out because you may not want to be complicit in a Kremlin operation.
Congressman Himes, thank you for your insight. We'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you for watching. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.